They said no one survives the Willow Creek flood, not when the river swallows homes whole. But on the fourth night, as the sirens fell silent and the rain refused to stop, a police officer was spotted wading through the current, carrying a wounded German shepherd in his arms. Her name was Daisy. She was pregnant, and she had lost everything. What no one knew then was that this dog would not only bring life into the storm, but lead him back to the one thing he thought he'd buried forever: faith. What began as a rescue would turn into a story of love, courage, and the quiet miracles that rise when all hope has drowned. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, redemption, and the unseen hands that pull us from the flood. The rain came down like broken glass, slicing through the air, heavy enough to blur the line between sky and river. The town of Willow Creek had vanished beneath it, houses swallowed whole, fences bent like ribs of a drowned beast, and silence replaced by the growl of water that refused to rest. Officer Luke Henderson, 36, stood at the edge of what used to be Main Street, now an angry brown torrent cutting through the town's heart. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose strength came not from pride, but from the need to keep others alive. His face, though still young, carried the weathering of loss, faint creases under gray-blue eyes, the kind that never stopped scanning the horizon for something worth saving. His beard was short, trimmed more out of habit than care, and his hair, dark and wet beneath his cap, stuck to his forehead in uneven strands. He had served 6 years in the army, but war was never what broke him. It was water, the same kind of flood that had taken his wife 3 summers ago. Since then, Luke lived like a man half in this world, half still standing on that collapsing bridge in memory, reaching for someone he could not save. He radioed in, his voice steady. "Unit 4 checking West Bank. Visibility's low. I'm moving toward the old Sawmill Road." Static answered him. The communication lines were dying, like the lights, like everything else. He pressed on, wading through waist-deep water, flashlight beam trembling across the chaos. A faint sound rose above the storm. Not human, not mechanical, but alive. A whimper, a desperate bark. Luke froze, turned his light toward the noise. In the middle of the flooded street, something moved, a shape fighting against the current, paws clawing at a drifting plank of wood. A dog. Not small, but large and sleek. Its fur soaked to the skin, the distinct black and tan coat of a German shepherd. It was trying to stay afloat, pushing forward with fading strength. Around its neck, a collar glinted faintly, engraved with something half erased by time and mud. Die, and a row of numbers that ended abruptly in scratches. Without thinking, Luke dropped his jacket and stepped into the torrent. The cold seized his legs like iron, dragging him sideways, but he pushed on, shouting, "Hey, easy girl, hold on!" The dog flailed once, then locked eyes with him, wild amber eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. In that instant, Luke saw more than panic. He saw recognition, as if the animal understood that help had finally come. He lunged, arm extended, catching her by the collar. The current yanked both of them under, swallowing their shouts. They surfaced near a mailbox half buried in the flood. Luke grunted, kicking hard, hauling the heavy body toward a floating truck bed. "You're all right. You're okay," he gasped, voice cracking. The dog trembled, panting, ribs heaving. He lifted her up, water streaming off her coat, and collapsed beside her, chest burning. For a moment, the rain faded from his awareness, replaced by the sound of her breathing, quick, uneven, alive. Back at the emergency shelter, the old elementary gym turned refuge. The generator lights flickered like fireflies. Luke carried the shepherd in his arms, water dripping from his uniform. Inside, Grace Miller, a 30-year-old volunteer medic, rushed toward him. Grace had the kind of face that stayed calm even when the world was falling apart. Freckles over fair skin, hair tied messily under a yellow rain hood, and steady brown eyes that could quiet fear. She had come from Lexington to help after the first evacuation call. Her kindness was quiet but firm, the kind that never asked for credit. "Put her here," Grace said, spreading a towel over a cot. As Luke laid the dog down, Grace's hand brushed over the animal's belly. She looked up sharply. "Luke, she's pregnant. And it's close." Luke blinked, water dripping from his lashes. "You're sure?" Grace nodded, pressing gently. "Hours, maybe days. She's been through hell." The shepherd whined softly, her paw twitching as if reaching for something lost. Luke crouched beside her, running a hand over her head. "She's strong," he murmured. "Stronger than most people I know." He tried scanning the collar tag with the microchip reader, but the network was down, flood interference again. Grace frowned. "We'll find her owner when the systems are back. For now, she needs warmth and rest. So do you." Luke smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Rest isn't my thing." He fetched an old blanket, wrapped it around Daisy, and sat beside the cot. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills like a memory that wouldn't stay buried. Hours passed. The gym dimmed into night, candles flickering in jars. Luke sat with his back against the wall, watching Daisy breathe. Her sides rose and fell in rhythm with the rain tapping the roof. Somewhere in the distance, someone coughed, someone prayed. He found himself whispering, almost unconsciously, "You made it, girl. You and me both." He closed his eyes, but sleep never came. Only the echo of water and a faint ache in his chest, the same one that always appeared when storms returned. Then, in the hush between thunderclaps, Daisy stirred. A soft sound escaped her. Not pain, but something smaller, alive. Luke reached out instinctively, placing his hand on her belly. Under his palm, something moved. A flutter, a heartbeat. His breath caught. "Good girl," he whispered, voice trembling, as lightning flashed across the room. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, two survivors shared the quiet promise of life. The storm hadn't stopped, only changed its rhythm. Rain still drummed against the tin roof, but softer now, as though the sky itself was too exhausted to keep roaring. The old wooden cabin of Officer Luke Henderson sat on a small rise above the flooded town, half surrounded by murky water and scattered branches. Inside, the smell of damp wood and smoke from a small fire mixed with the faint metallic tang of fear. Luke crouched beside the fireplace, his face lit by the trembling light of an oil lamp. His features were hard in the flicker, the defined jawline of a man used to holding back grief, the quiet lines at the corners of his eyes carved not by age but by years of trying to forget. The firelight revealed the faint scar on his left temple, a memory of his military days, a night in Afghanistan, an explosion. a brother lost. It wasn't the wound that haunted him. It was the silence that followed. He had returned home carrying that silence like a second shadow. Now, in that same silence, he listened to the rhythmic breathing of Daisy, the German shepherd lying on a folded blanket near the fire. Her fur, a deep mix of sable and tan, still glistened with the damp of the storm despite Luke's attempts to dry her. She was around 5 years old, large but elegant, her movements heavy now with the weight of life inside her. Her eyes, that gentle amber hue of trust and sorrow, followed Luke with something almost human, the look of a soul who had known both loyalty and loss. Every few minutes she shifted, panting softly, her belly tight and trembling. Across the small room, Grace Miller worked quietly, preparing towels and a bowl of warm water. Her brown hair had escaped its bun, strands sticking to her cheeks as sweat and humidity clung to her skin. Grace was 30, younger than Luke, but there was a steadiness about her that made her seem older. Before volunteering for rescue work, she'd been a veterinary nurse, though she rarely spoke about it. There was a reason she had come to Willow Creek when the flood warnings rose. She had lost her own dog 2 years earlier, swept away in a flash flood on the Kentucky backroads. Helping now was her way of forgiving herself, even if she never said it out loud. "Her contractions are getting closer," Grace murmured, placing a reassuring hand on Daisy's side. "It's happening tonight." Luke nodded, his hand tightening on the old jacket he'd used to dry the dog. His cabin had never felt so small. Walls groaning under the wind, windows rattling as thunder rolled across the valley. He stood, restless, pacing once before kneeling again beside the shepherd. "She's strong," he said quietly, as much to himself as to Grace. "She'll need your calm," Grace replied, glancing up. "Dogs feel what we feel." Luke smiled faintly, that tired half-smile that never reached his eyes. "Then she's in trouble." The clock ticked softly between thunderclaps, Daisy's breathing grew shallower, her eyes dilating with pain and instinct. Luke could feel the tension rising, not fear, but something deeper, protective. When the first cry came, it was small and raw, swallowed almost immediately by the storm outside. Grace moved quickly, steady hands working with the precision of someone who had done this before. Luke watched, his throat tight, as a tiny, trembling form slid into the world, slick with birth and shivering under Grace's towel. Daisy turned her head, licking the pup clean with the fierce tenderness of a mother. "One," Grace whispered. Then came another, and another. By the time lightning flared across the sky, 4 small lives had entered the room, their weak cries rising above the sound of rain. Luke's chest ached with something he hadn't felt in years, a fragile, wordless awe. He placed his old military jacket beside Daisy, forming a makeshift nest. "Welcome home, little ones," he murmured, his voice rough. Daisy licked his hand before curling protectively around her pups. Grace sat back, wiping her brow with her sleeve. The storm roared again, but inside the cabin it felt like a different world, small, warm, and alive. "They're all breathing strong," Grace said softly. "You did good, Daisy." Luke's gaze drifted from the mother to the pups. Each one squirmed weakly, noses twitching, tiny bodies pressed against their mother's side. For a brief, impossible moment, he thought of his wife, her laughter in summer rain, her hand on his shoulder as they watched storms from their old porch. "You'd have loved this," he whispered under his breath. Grace pretended not to hear. Outside, the radio crackled to life with static. Luke rose, crossing to the desk where it sat near the window. "This is Unit 4, he said, pressing the button. "Go ahead." "Luke, it's dispatch. Flood levels are rising again near the north end. We need all available units. You're on call." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the fire, toward Daisy and her newborns. Grace turned sharply. "You can't go. Not tonight. She needs care, and you've been running non-stop for days." Luke stood by the window, watching the dark river below swallow another fence post. His reflection stared back at him. Hollow eyes, wet uniform, a man pulled between duty and something far more human. "People are still out there," he said quietly. "And if they're still fighting to live, I don't get to stop." Grace shook her head, but there was no anger, only quiet sadness. "You can't save everyone, Luke." He turned, that faint glimmer of stubbornness, the same that had driven him through war, igniting behind his eyes. "Maybe not, but I can try." A faint sound made him pause, claws on wood. Daisy was trying to stand, her legs shaking beneath her. She looked at him, ears twitching, tail flicking weakly. "Hey, no," Luke said gently. "You stay, you've done enough." But Daisy didn't listen. She limped toward the door, pressing her nose against his knee. Her eyes, soft but resolute, held his gaze. It was as if she knew, as if she refused to let him go alone. Luke exhaled a breath somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "You too, huh?" he murmured. He turned to Grace. "Looks like I've got a partner." Grace didn't stop him this time. She just handed him a dry blanket. "At least keep them warm." Luke nodded. He knelt, checking the pups one last time. 4 tiny bodies curled beneath his jacket, safe in the amber glow of the lantern. Then he lifted Daisy gently, wrapping her in the blanket, and carried her toward the waiting police truck outside. Thunder cracked once more, echoing off the flooded hills as he placed Daisy in the passenger seat. She looked back toward the cabin, toward the sleeping pups, then at him. "I'll be back soon," Luke promised. He wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, her or himself. The truck engine roared to life, taillights glowing red through the mist. From the rear window, the faint glimmer of a flashlight shone on the box where the puppies slept, their small chests rising and falling to the rhythm of the storm. Daisy turned her head, watching the light fade into the distance as they drove into the flood. The morning came with no light, only a dull gray sky bleeding into the restless water that swallowed Willow Creek. The air hung heavy with humidity and the scent of rot. Maple Hollow, once a cheerful neighborhood lined with white fences and mailboxes shaped like birds, was now a maze of rooftops barely clinging above the flood. The rain had stopped, but the river had not forgiven. It crept higher, silent and relentless, like grief itself. Officer Luke Henderson guided his rescue boat slowly between half-submerged houses. His uniform was soaked, clinging to his arms like a second skin. The once clean blue fabric was streaked with mud and oil, but his movements remained precise, measured. The discipline of a man who could not afford mistakes. His eyes, pale gray like the stormlight, scanned every window, every rooftop. He had seen too many ghosts in water before. He refused to let today add another. His face was gaunt from exhaustion, a faint stubble darkening his jaw, and yet behind the sternness was the quiet hum of guilt that never left him. The old wound of a promise broken to a woman who'd never made it home. At the bow of the boat stood Daisy, her fur matted and darkened by the damp, her ears twitching as she sniffed the air. She was leaner now, still recovering from the birth, but her body carried a fierce vitality, a mother's strength sharpened by instinct. Her amber eyes burned with focus. Every ripple, every faint sound beneath the rain-drenched silence seemed to reach her before it reached Luke. Her paws were steady against the metal hull, tail still, posture alert. Luke watched her, murmuring, "You smell something, don't you, girl?" Daisy turned her head briefly, a soft whine escaping her throat, before facing forward again. That was enough. Luke trusted that signal more than he trusted any map or radio. He maneuvered the boat between two collapsed rooftops, the motor sputtering in the shallow surge. "Maple Hollow sector," he called into the radio clipped to his vest. "Unit 4 reporting. Water depth 6 feet and rising. No visual on survivors." Static. Then a faint voice. Grace Miller, clear even through the crackle. "Copy that, Luke. Watch your west side. The levee broke again. You're in the worst pocket." Luke smirked tiredly. "Always am." Grace sighed softly over the line. "You don't have to play hero every day, you know." "Not every day," he said, glancing down at Daisy. "Just the ones that matter." Daisy's head jerked suddenly, ears pricking. She barked once, sharp and decisive, staring toward a stretch of water littered with debris, a torn bicycle, a plastic chair, a child's floating backpack. Luke's stomach tightened. "Got something," he muttered. He turned the motor off and listened. Between gusts of wind, a faint sound threaded through the stillness. A cry, high and thin. A child. "Hang on," Luke said. He grabbed the paddle, pushing the boat closer to a collapsed porch that jutted from the murky current. Daisy jumped into the water before he could stop her, cutting through the flood like a dark arrow. "Daisy!" he shouted, heart spiking, but the dog didn't look back. She paddled forward, nose low, following the faintest whiff of human scent through the chaos. Luke followed, steering close, his boots sloshing as he prepared the rope. Then he saw it, a small figure crouched on a rooftop, clinging to a chimney. A boy, maybe 6 or 7, soaked to the bone, his thin arms trembling around a piece of metal gutter. "It's okay!" Luke yelled over the water. "Don't move, I'm coming!" The boy's voice cracked, raw with terror. "It's gonna fall!" Luke tied the rope to a drain pipe and climbed, boots scraping against the slick siding. The shingles broke under his weight, sending pieces tumbling into the current. "Almost there," he said through clenched teeth. He reached the top, stretching his arm. "Take my hand, buddy." The boy, freckles, wide eyes, shaking like a leaf, hesitated, then lunged. Their hands met, cold and slippery. Luke pulled him close, wrapping an arm around the small body. "Got you," he breathed. Then the world shifted. The rope snapped. The rooftop cracked like glass, tilting toward the flood. Luke tightened his grip around the boy, but gravity took them both. The river roared up to meet them, cold, crushing, alive. For a moment, Luke saw only gray bubbles and the blur of his own hands reaching for the surface. The boy thrashed weakly, choking. Luke kicked upward, but the current yanked them sideways, spinning them toward the remnants of a fence. He tried to grab it, missed, tried again. A flash of motion cut through the water. Daisy. She was there, her teeth clamped on the leg of his soaked uniform. The force of her bite hurt, but it anchored him. She kicked furiously, dragging them toward a floating truck bed wedged between trees. Luke coughed, half crawling onto it, still holding the boy against his chest. Daisy climbed up beside them, chest heaving, fur dripping, eyes locked on him as if to say, "Don't you dare let go again." Luke lay there, gasping, one hand still gripping the boy's shoulder. "You're okay," he said hoarsely. "You're safe." The boy stared up at him wide-eyed, then turned to Daisy, whispering, "She saved me." Luke smiled faintly, water dripping from his chin. "Yeah," he said, "she saves all of us." The rescue team arrived 20 minutes later, their shouts echoing across the ruined street. When Grace's voice came through the radio, "Luke, we've got your signal!" He could barely answer. Daisy stood beside him on the truck bed, tail wagging weakly, her body shivering from exhaustion, but her eyes steady, proud. By evening, word had spread through the rescue base. A mother dog pulled a cop and a child from the flood. The story traveled faster than the storm itself. People called her the hero shepherd. Luke said nothing. He just fed her bits of jerky by the heater while she rested. That night, as he sat near the radio, drying his boots, Grace's voice crackled again. "Luke," she said quietly, "there's a woman on the emergency line. She's looking for a lost dog, a German shepherd named Daisy. Been missing 2 weeks before the flood." Luke froze. He turned toward Daisy, who was lying near the door, licking mud off her paws. She looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. When she lifted her head, their eyes met. For a heartbeat, he saw something there. Recognition, maybe, or sorrow. The kind that belonged to creatures who had lived through too much to forget. He didn't tell her what he'd heard. He just whispered, "Good girl," and turned off the radio. Outside, the river still whispered against the broken world. The night returned with vengeance. Rain came sideways in sheets, slapping against rooftops like handfuls of nails. The wind screamed through the broken trees of Willow Creek, tearing at the remaining power lines until they sparked like angry stars. The town, half drowned and half forgotten, seemed to shudder under the weight of the storm's second wave. Officer Luke Henderson stood beside the rescue truck, his flashlight beam trembling across the flood-swollen road. His soaked uniform clung to his frame, outlining the lean, hardened body of a man built from both discipline and regret. His beard had grown darker with the rain, framing a face marked by sleepless nights and quiet endurance. Luke had long ago accepted that storms spoke to him in ways silence couldn't. They reminded him of what he'd lost and what he still had to protect. But tonight felt different. There was something in the air, a deeper fear, as if the water itself were alive and waiting. The emergency radio crackled with static. Grace Miller's voice cut through, firm despite exhaustion. "The small dam at Willow Ridge is breaching. We've got 15 minutes before it goes. Evacuation orders active for the north and east sectors." Her words trembled just enough to betray the truth. They were running out of time. Luke pressed the radio button, his jaw set. "Copy that. What about the Millers on Creek Lane? They haven't checked in." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet curse. "Their line's dead. They're still in the floodplain." Luke didn't wait for orders. He glanced down at Daisy, the German shepherd sitting at his boots. Her fur was slick and heavy with water, her amber eyes glowing faintly in the flashlight beam. Even after everything, after exhaustion, after losing her litter for safety, she was still ready. Her ears perked up as if understanding every word. "Let's go, girl," he said softly, voice hoarse from the wind. "One more." Grace appeared from the truck, raincoat half-buttoned, her auburn hair plastered to her forehead. The 30-year-old rescue medic looked as though she had stepped out of a war zone. Mud on her cheeks, dark circles beneath her eyes. But her spirit, that quiet, unwavering compassion, hadn't dimmed. "You're insane, Luke," she said, but she was already climbing in beside him. "Let's make it quick." They drove through the flood, the truck's headlights carving tunnels through sheets of rain. Fallen branches scraped the sides, and water slapped the doors in rhythmic fury. Luke's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Grace kept checking her handheld scanner. It beeped weakly, then died. "We're blind," she muttered. "Then we trust what we see," Luke said, "and what she hears." He nodded toward Daisy, whose nose was pressed to the cracked window, breathing in the chaos like a compass searching for direction. They reached the Miller's house, a small, single-story home nearly swallowed by the flood. The porch was gone, the windows dark. Luke jumped into the waist-high current, the cold biting through his bones. "Mr. Miller!" he shouted, voice swallowed by wind. "It's Officer Henderson! Can you hear me?" No answer. Only the moan of shifting wood. Grace moved beside him, gripping a flashlight. "The water's too high for the back door," she said. "We'll have to go through the side." A sudden bark tore through the storm. Daisy. She was already ahead of them, her powerful body slicing through the current toward the half-collapsed kitchen window. She barked again, frantic, urgent. Luke felt the surge of adrenaline hit his chest, that same instinctive faith he always had when she led. "She's got something!" They followed. The water was now chest-deep, and debris floated past. Toys, a chair, a Bible swollen with rain. Inside, the house was half under, the walls trembling with every gust. Daisy's barking grew sharper. She was pawing at the cellar door, the sound of faint, muffled cries rising beneath the storm's roar. "Help!" came a frail voice. "Hang on!" Luke shouted. He dove, kicking the latch free. The door swung open, releasing a gush of dark, freezing water, and two elderly faces appeared, terrified and pale. Samuel Miller, 73, a retired carpenter with a gray beard and trembling hands, held his wife June, a small woman wrapped in a soaked quilt. "We thought," Samuel stammered, voice breaking, "we thought no one was coming." "You're not alone," Luke said firmly. "Let's get you out." The floor creaked ominously as Grace and Luke helped them through the door. June clung to Grace's arm, whispering prayers through chattering teeth. Daisy swam in circles near the stairs, keeping herself between them and the strongest current. Her body shook, but her eyes never wavered. Then the sound came, a deep, rolling thunder, not from the sky but from beneath. Luke's head snapped up. "That's the dam!" "Go!" Grace shouted. "Now!" They pushed toward the roof access ladder, but the water surged faster, slamming against the walls. Daisy barked once, twice, then dove under. "Daisy!" Luke yelled, scanning the black water. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. Then her head broke the surface again, and in her jaws, a floating flashlight. The light flickered, illuminating the path to the attic stairs. Luke half-dragged the Millers up. Grace went next. Daisy struggled against the rising current, her paws scratching for grip. Luke reached back, hand outstretched. "Come on, girl!" A wall of water hit. It wasn't a wave. It was a living thing. A force that swallowed sound and light and hope all at once. Luke clung to the ladder, water ripping at his clothes, tearing at his fingers. Daisy vanished beneath the torrent. He screamed her name, once, twice, but the storm devoured it. When they burst through the attic window onto the roof, dawn was bleeding faintly through the clouds. The rain slowed to a mournful drizzle. Luke sat motionless, soaked, holding the shaking hands of the millers as rescue boats approached in the distance. His gaze was fixed on the churning brown water below. Grace sat beside him, her voice a whisper. "Luke." He didn't answer. His lips trembled once. His eyes, hollow, stunned, searched the horizon. "She's gone," he said quietly, the words like stones sinking in water. No one spoke again. The wind softened. Somewhere, thunder rolled away toward the hills. Hours later, when the storm had finally passed, Grace stood alone by the riverbank. The light of early morning spilled through clouds torn apart by the wind. Something moved in the reeds, a dark shape dragging itself through the mud. "Luke!" she called. He turned sharply and froze. Daisy, soaked and trembling, crawled from the river's edge. Around her neck hung a broken collar, the tag glinting weakly in the pale sunlight. Summer sunlight had returned to Willow Creek, yet the air still carried a faint smell of mud and rain, the lingering breath of a storm that refused to be forgotten. The river was calm now, sliding past the edge of town like a patient old creature, its surface reflecting the scattered clouds of early August. On its banks, where debris once marked destruction, wildflowers had begun to bloom again, stubborn and bright. Officer Luke Henderson walked along the gravel road toward his cabin, the sound of his boots crunching against the stones mixing with the lazy hum of cicadas. His uniform was rolled at the sleeves, the sun outlining the muscle and scar tissue of a man who had earned every mark. His beard had grown a little thicker since the flood, a rough edge against the quiet steadiness of his gray-blue eyes. He carried with him the heaviness of what he'd seen and lost. But there was something new now, a softness that came with peace. Near the porch, Daisy waited. The German shepherd stood proudly, her coat now thick and clean, a deep sable gleaming under sunlight. Her eyes still carried the gold hue of intelligence and tenderness that had saved lives in the flood. Around her feet, 4 growing pups tumbled, clumsy and full of mischief, chasing each other across the tall grass. Daisy barked once, not in alarm but in greeting, her tail wagging with calm dignity. Luke smiled. "You're keeping them in line, huh?" he murmured, crouching to pat her head. She leaned against him, pressing her muzzle to his arm, as if to remind him that the storms had passed, at least for now. Inside the house, Grace Miller sat by the window, sorting through stacks of reports and rescue forms. She looked different out of her rain gear, her brown hair loose and sunlit, her skin pale but no longer weary. She still wore the same silver cross around her neck, a quiet symbol of hope she never spoke about. When Luke entered, she looked up and smiled faintly. "You're late," she said. "Traffic," he deadpanned, nodding toward the pups that had followed him inside. Grace chuckled, shaking her head. "They've been your only company these past weeks. I'm surprised you haven't trained them to salute yet." Luke's grin faded into something gentler. "They'll learn better things than that." Grace hesitated, watching him. "You've changed, Luke." He raised an eyebrow. "For better or worse?" She shrugged. "Just lighter. Like someone finally stopped running from ghosts." Before he could answer, a knock came at the door, a gentle, hesitant rhythm. Daisy's ears perked up immediately, her body tensing, not in fear, but recognition. Luke opened the door. Standing on the step was a woman, soaked in sunlight and trembling with disbelief. Emily Sanders, 34, had the kind of presence that spoke of both strength and kindness. Soft hazel eyes framed by long auburn hair tied loosely at her shoulders, freckles scattered across her cheeks. She wore a simple blue summer dress and held a small, mud-stained dog collar in her hands. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice catching. I was told you found a German shepherd during the flood. Her name's Daisy." Luke's chest tightened. He turned slightly, and Daisy stepped forward. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the recognition came, the tilt of her head, the quickening of her breath, the way her tail began to tremble. "Daisy," Emily whispered, sinking to her knees. Tears spilled down her face as she reached out, laughing through sobs. "Oh, sweetheart, I thought I lost you." Daisy barked once, sharp and uncertain. Then she moved forward, slow at first, sniffing Emily's hands. Her tail wagged, but her eyes darted back, toward Luke. It was not confusion. It was something deeper, the silent question of loyalty. Luke stood there, frozen between gratitude and loss. He knew this moment had to come, but he hadn't expected it to hurt like this. He knelt beside Daisy, his hand resting gently on her back. "Go on, girl," he whispered. "She's your home." Daisy looked up at him, ears flicking. Then, as if understanding every word, she stepped into Emily's arms. The woman clutched her, sobbing into her fur. Daisy licked her cheek once and then turned her head back toward Luke and let out a small, grateful bark, soft and tender, like a goodbye. Grace watched quietly from the porch, her eyes glistening. Luke stayed silent, his expression calm, but his throat tight. There was pride there, and an ache he didn't try to hide. A year later, the flood existed only in stories and scars. The town had rebuilt itself, its people stronger, its fields green again. On the front page of the Willow Creek Chronicle, a photograph captured a quiet morning at the memorial park. Officer Luke Henderson, teacher Emily Sanders, and Daisy, the hero of the flood, attend the annual remembrance for victims of Willow Creek. In the picture, Daisy stood tall beside Luke. Her pups, now full-grown and trained as part of the rescue team, lined beside her. Emily smiled faintly, her hand resting on Daisy's collar. Luke's gaze was fixed on the river behind them, now calm, the surface glinting gold in the sunrise. That evening, after the ceremony, Luke lingered alone by the water. The sky was painted with soft orange and lavender, and the world smelled of rain and renewal. Daisy padded up beside him, pressing her head against his knee. Luke looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe God didn't send you to be saved, huh? Maybe he sent you to save me." The river answered with a quiet ripple, carrying the scent of wildflowers downstream, the scent of home. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles through lightning or voices in the clouds, but through small acts of courage, through the ones who walk beside us when we can no longer stand alone. For Luke, it wasn't the storm that changed his life. It was a dog named Daisy, a creature sent at the exact moment when faith was slipping away. And maybe that's how God works. Not with thunder, but with loyalty. Not with fire, but with love that refuses to drown. So tonight, if you've ever felt lost in your own flood, remember this story. Miracles still walk among us, sometimes on four legs. Before you go, share this story if it touched your heart. Leave a comment for those you pray for tonight. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep spreading faith, kindness, and the quiet miracles God places in the lives of those who believe. May God bless you, your home, and every soul who still listens for hope in the storm.